I want to talk to you guys about the final night of the Democratic National Convention, but I want to first ask you about what didn't happen tonight, which was I was in the convention hall. There was a rumor that there was going to be Beyonce performing, and that clearly didn't happen.
It didn't.
It didn't.
Oh, okay.
Wait, Aaron, did you black out during the DNC?
No, there was TMZ reported that there was going to be Beyonce there, and I texted it to my family, who got quite excited, and then it didn't happen. So I think they're feeling very let down by the Democratic Party.
I never believed it, if I'm being honest. I just didn't. I don't think politicians like to be upstaged.
Welcome to the Campaign Moment on Friday, August 23rd. I'm Elahe Izadi, co-host of Post Reports.
And I'm Aaron Blake, senior political reporter and author of the Campaign Moment newsletter. We're also joined today by White House reporter and Kamala Harris expert, Cleve Wootson. Hey, Cleve.
Kamala Harris expert? Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Many people are saying.
And it's also our last day working from this giant media tent in a parking lot in Chicago. There's lots of reporters and other people around us. We're next to the United Center, and that's where the Democratic National Convention has just wrapped up. So we're actually talking pretty late on Thursday night. It's almost Friday morning.
That's right. And Vice President Kamala Harris has formally accepted the Democratic nomination for president tonight. We're going to be talking about what's next for her campaign after the convention and which speakers made the most of their time on the stage over the last 4 days.
Yeah, and before we get to what happened the rest of the week, let us start with what happened Thursday night. Let's get into Kamala Harris's acceptance speech. This was a moment that everyone had been waiting for all week long. Cleve, we obviously really wanted to talk with you because you've been covering Kamala Harris for the last 4 years. Just your first impression, what really stood out to you about this speech tonight?
The entire first third of Kamala Harris's speech was all biography, which seems odd when you think about it, right? She's been vice president for 4 years. But there's really an effort on her part, it seems, to introduce herself on her terms. You know, a lot of people have labeled her a lot of things. Republicans have called her the border czar. She's recently been called a DEI candidate. And there's just really this very strong effort for her to say, this is who I am, this is what I am about, and this is what this race is about, you know, at the outset as we go into the home stretch.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Was there anything particularly about her biography tonight and how she portrayed herself that you feel like was, I'm reintroducing myself?
I think she really tried to explain the why she became a prosecutor. She talked about a friend that was a victim of sexual assault at the hands of her stepfather.
You see, when I was in high school, I started to notice something about my best friend, Wanda. She was sad at school, and there were times she didn't want to go home. So one day I asked if everything was all right, and she confided in me that she was being sexually abused by her stepfather.
And inviting that friend to come live with them, and how that really made her want to fight for the weak and disenfranchised and really to seek justice.
This is one of the reasons I became a prosecutor, to protect people like Wanda, because I believe everyone has a right to safety, to dignity, and to justice.
There's been a lot talked about in Democratic circles about the role of law enforcement in 2020. It was her being a prosecutor was kind of a bad thing. And now she's sort of reintroducing that as a person who wants to fight for justice, to fight for freedoms, to fight for the people. It's all playing into her biography as campaign theme.
Yeah, there was so much detail about her family background, her story, why she got into public service. That's
her mom,
so fascinating. Yeah, her mom, lots of catchphrases from her mom. Aaron, what stood out to you about the speech, and especially the rest of it?
I think what stood out for me in this speech was the focus on normalcy and competence, and kind of pitching that as the alternative to Donald Trump. A lot of this speech was about Donald Trump. She spoke about him by name a lot. She referenced a lot of the attack lines that we've seen throughout the convention. But the way in which she differed from the people who came before her was in kind of pitching herself as an antidote to the chaos. She pointed to the idea of the country wanting a realistic and practical leader. She talked about the idea that you want somebody who listens to you and who isn't out for themselves. And all of this was like, you guys saw what happened 4 years ago. Maybe you don't remember all of it, but I am going to bring back that normalcy. And so she did kind of get at some of those high-minded themes, but I think the central kind of pitch of this was, I am a competent alternative, and I am going to not make your life chaotic like it was. Let's listen to a little bit of what she said about that.
I promise to be a president for all Americans. You can always trust me to put country above party and self.
So I think it is in some ways similar to what Joe Biden ran on in 2020. Of course, that was a very successful election, but we have seen things since then that feed this argument. You know, we of course had January 6th, which happened after the election. We've had these disclosures about Trump's comments about military veterans and things like that. And so there is plenty to work with. And for the Harris campaign, I think it's been about reminding people about those things and kind of painting that contrast.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit more of a gentle reminder, though. It's rare that we have an opportunity to compare two Democratic campaigns for president in the same cycle. But Biden had a much more dour way of talking about this existential threat, this doom and gloom that came from Trump. Whereas Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have leaned more into weird and pragmatism, yes, but not, more joy and aspiration than fear, doom, and glooms.
That's interesting because I think another moment where it felt different than how maybe Joe Biden would talk about an issue was when Kamala Harris was talking about abortion. And here in her speech tonight, she was talking about what Donald Trump would do if he was elected president.
Get this, he plans to create a national anti-abortion coordinator and force states to report on women's miscarriages and abortions. Simply put, they are out of their minds.
Aaron, did that moment stand out to you when we were thinking about how Biden spoke about reproductive rights? That this seems like to be such a defining characteristic of the Harris campaign.
Yeah, and this is another issue that wasn't there as much for the Democrats in 2020. And so this is an issue that she can play up, not just because of Roe v. Wade being overturned, but also because she's more comfortable with it. Joe Biden kind of checks the box of talking about these issues, but he's never quite as comfortable with it. I thought it was really interesting that she went there like she did. She's basically citing plans from Project 2025, which is a lengthy plan put forward by the Heritage Foundation, which involves former Trump officials basically laying out an agenda for a next Trump presidency. An effort that Trump has essentially disavowed and said this isn't his plan. But Democrats have cast doubt on Trump's attempts to distance himself from this. But that's been a big theme this week, is Project 2025 and tying that to the Trump campaign.
There was one other moment that I think really stood out to people in Harris's speech, and it's when she talked about Israel and Gaza. So we have a little bit of tape from that moment.
With respect to the war in Gaza, President Biden and I are working around the clock because now is the time to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done. And let me be clear, I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself, because the people of Israel must never again face the horror that a terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7.
Did that stand out to you, Aaron?
The amount that she spoke about this issue did, because this is something that they've really kind of avoided throughout the week, apart from the parents of a hostage speaking on Wednesday about their plight and about this conflict. I thought it was really interesting that she took it as head-on as she did.
At the same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost. Desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over again. The scale of suffering is heartbreaking. President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
Of course, her comments were very much kind of, here is the Israeli perspective, here is the Palestinian perspective. I have sympathy for both of them. But she did say some things about Israel's right to self-determination that sounded a lot more in line with what you would expect from President Biden if he were being renominated here. She went pretty strong on that and then added humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We are working very hard on a ceasefire. So this to me was her trying to kind of make it clear that this was being addressed and that this was being taken seriously, that they weren't just trying to skirt this issue completely.
Yeah, two things to note. One, when both Biden was speaking and when Kamala Harris was speaking tonight, there were attempts, not really successful, but attempts to sort of start a protest or speak out while they were making comments about Gaza. You couldn't really hear it on the feed or on the TV, but I was there on the floor during the speech when these protest moments kind of started. You could definitely hear it. It's evidence that this is still an issue, that even at the Democratic National Convention, there are fissures. There are people that feel the need to speak out. The other thing that's really important is that Harris's stance hasn't really changed. It's not really different from Biden's. They need a ceasefire now. They've talked about humanitarian aid, self-determination, but she speaks about it more empathetically and with more care and concern. Biden was accused of even being a little bit callous.
And that's specifically about the Palestinians.
Specifically about the Palestinians. Biden was accused of being a little bit callous in the beginning. And for Harris, it was sort of the opposite, sort of a long segment of her speech that's just talking about the need to be humanitarian, the need to be good people, the need to be moral.
Cleve, actually, at this moment, I want to step back and think about how Kamala Harris got to this moment. And you recently published this really fantastic piece about how Harris has turned her reputation around to become a Democratic Party star. If we think back, there were concerns just even a few weeks ago, a little over a month ago, before President Joe Biden dropped out, about whether she would be able to lead the Democratic ticket because of stumbles she had made when she ran in 2020 and after she became vice president. So first, Cleve, can you just remind us what some of those concerns about her were?
Harris had a historic but very difficult first year. As one advisor has told me, everybody expected her to make history everywhere she went. There was a gigantic spotlight on her. People like me were following her around the world.
Because she was the first woman to hold this role.
The first black woman to be vice president, a historic moment.
Yeah.
But what happened is that she sort of made mistake after mistake. She had a bad interview in Guatemala where she was charged with, tackling the root causes of migration, where she said, well, we've been to the border, but we haven't been to the border, a stumbling moment. She had a raft of staff departures even before the first year was up. And by the end of that first year, a lot of Democrats were thinking, well, maybe she's not the heir apparent. Maybe she's not the one that's going to lead our party in the future. And they were really casting about for anybody else to lead them. I don't think anybody in Harris's orbit or any Democrats felt as certain about Harris then as they do now.
And so what happened then? When did her turnaround begin? And what was it that allowed her to arrive at this moment?
So a lot of us stopped paying attention.
But not Cleve.
Well, it was my job to follow her around the world. But a lot of us stopped paying attention. People have jobs and they're not paying as close attention to the vice president, which is usually how it is, right? Who pays a super amount of attention to the vice president that's not named Cleve? But there was this process. There was this effort by Harris herself, by the White House, by her allies outside of the administration, and by members of her staff to sort of turn things around. They sought to build allies across the country, people that could speak up for Harris when criticism came. Some White House officials told me that they felt like they did not adequately have Harris's back.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
that they acknowledged that.
There was even a moment where Joe Biden told his senior staff that if you keep leaking stories about Kamala Harris, you will be former employees.
Like if you would put out negative stuff about her, I'm going to fire you, basically.
Some folks had been putting out anonymously negative stuff about him.
Wow.
And Joe Biden felt the need to staunch that, to have Kamala Harris's back. And then, perhaps most importantly, as all of this building is happening in the summer of 2022, the Supreme Court announced that it was overturning Roe v. Wade, which guaranteed a right to an abortion. And Harris saw a new lane to talk about reproductive freedom. It's an uncomfortable lane for Joe Biden, always has been. He's a Catholic. Sometimes his faith conflicts with arguments on that issue. And that lane was very clearly Kamala Harris's. She could do that without having to worry about stepping on Joe Biden's toes. And she did. And a lot of the arguments, a lot of the things that we heard in this speech tonight were workshopped, in her traveling the country, her visiting an abortion clinic, her going to Florida to contrast Democrat policies with Ron DeSantis. You can see
Florida governor there.
Yeah, you can see all of the seeds of this speech, which she has been waiting to give for most of her life, right? Sort of being workshopped over and over again over the last 2 years, while most of us aren't really paying attention.
Aaron, I wonder, as Cleve's talking about, Kamala Harris has basically workshopped and gotten more and more comfortable with the spotlight and articulating all these issues. Do you feel like this speech was a success?
Yeah, I'm not sure it necessarily recast the race, but she didn't have to recast the race tonight. The race was already moving in her favor. Being viewed as that kind of normal, competent candidate has been working for her. She's created some distance between her brand and Biden's. She is more popular than Biden is right now. And so I think that created a premium on just kind of keeping things moving in the right direction. So maybe you don't go out of your way to give a barn burner of a speech and totally, recast the narrative of this race. You kind of build on those themes that have been working for you so far. And I think that's what she tried to do tonight. And I think it was certainly well received in the building. And I don't see it being anything that's necessarily going to change a whole lot about this race, which is good for her.
Okay, well, let's take a quick break, and when we'll come back, we're going to talk about other highlights from the convention and what's next for Harris and the Democrats. We'll be right back. Okay, Cleve and Aaron, let's talk about some of the other messages that we heard repeatedly throughout this week. I was really struck by how many of the speakers talked about freedom. Aaron and I know you and I spoke about this on the campaign moment, and it felt like, again, the Democratic Party was just reclaiming patriotism. Let's actually hear a sampling of this. So this is New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, Vice Presidential nominee, and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and Oprah Winfrey.
Tonight is about freedom.
When we Democrats talk about freedom, we mean the freedom to make a better life for yourself and the people that you love.
But more than anything else, let us choose freedom. Why? Because that's the best of America. We're all Americans, and together, let's all choose Kamala Harris.
I thought I was about to get a car.
Yeah, I just love that she leaned into the meme. Like, I know this is a meme, and apparently it was written on the teleprompter this way.
Yeah, with the A's drawn
Yes.
out. Yeah, just in case she forgot what her thing was.
But Aaron, seriously though, what is your take on this notion around freedom and patriotism at the DNC?
I mean, there's something to be said for just repeating something over and over again and making it your theme. Like Donald Trump has been very effective in just power of repetition, making people associate certain words and concepts with him. And this week, especially the last couple days, was kind of about beating people over the head with freedom to some extent. Like this word was spoken over and over again.
Freedom or else.
They played, Beyonce's Freedom over and over again in a way that it's going to be in my head constantly. Multiple speakers talking about this. There's an ad called, We Believe in Freedom.
Right.
I mean, they really made an effort to try and frame this up as not just their messages about kind of this populist version of economic freedom where, regular people aren't being infringed upon by powerful interests and things like that, but also to reclaim this kind of territory of patriotism, which I think for the last 20 years, Democrats have kind of abandoned ever since the Iraq War. They kind of ceded that territory of waving the American flags and chanting USA, USA. And so it seemed to be a conscious decision to be like, look, we're patriotic too. We're patriotic in a way that is much more geared towards the middle class.
Also, I do feel like we have to talk about the Obamas here. You know, it's interesting because these conventions, sometimes you see a breakout star. And we had all these Democrats who were on the short list for vice presidential candidate and all these up and comers come out and give speeches. But the speeches that people are still talking about are ones from the former president and former first lady.
Michelle Obama was the breakout star.
Yeah, Michelle Obama was the breakout star of the 2024 DNC. And it was interesting because I felt like Michelle Obama's speech was a far cry from 2016 Michelle Obama at the DNC when she said, when they go low, we go high. That's not the Michelle Obama we got this time. At this one, she took it straight to Trump. I mean, she said, who's going to tell him that this is one of those black jobs? Her referencing, you know, his comment that migrants are taking, quote, black jobs, just doing a direct callback to him. I'm wondering what both of you think that at this convention, it seems like the most talked about, impactful speeches were ones that were from formers.
Couple things.
Do you not agree?
So I agree. I agree that there have been questions for a very long time about whether there is a breakout star, a Democratic bench, people waiting in the wings and all of that stuff. I just don't think we should discount the Obama's ability to just electrify a crowd.
So it's more like they're singular.
They're just a singular entity that they're very, very good at doing this particular thing. And the thing that they are doing is they are saying the baton belongs to Kamala Harris. Like all that energy you had in 2008, all those warm and fuzzy feelings that you have for us, transfer them over to Kamala Harris, who is trying to, you know, reform the same multiracial, multicultural coalition and sort of take us forward away from Donald Trump. Like I saw a lot of that. Even Al Sharpton is trying to sort of put Kamala Harris in this long list of, you know, civil rights icons.
Yeah, I mean, it was what we've come to expect from the Obamas. You know, Michelle Obama seems to want no part of politics, and yet she's giving the most well-received speech at a Democratic National Convention. It was a lot about hope and change, just like it has been in the past, and I think we've got a clip of that here.
America, hope is making a comeback.
So it's a similar message, but it's definitely updated for where the Democratic Party is right now. You know, Democrats have wanted to become more combative with the Republican ticket. So you saw Michelle Obama go from they go low, we go high to making a comment about Donald Trump and addressing him personally and in pretty direct ways.
Oh, and then the Barack Obama moment.
And then the Barack Obama line, you know, the crowd size line.
There's the childish nicknames, the crazy conspiracy theories, this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
And we should note that Barack Obama made some hand gestures as he was talking about Donald Trump and his fascination and preoccupation with crowd sizes. That kind of suggested that Barack Obama wasn't just talking about crowd sizes, but perhaps something else.
Yeah, like kind of a little crass innuendo.
That was something that I don't think we would have seen from them before. So it's kind of like trying to recreate the magic of the Obama years for the Democratic Party, which were the best years of the 21st century for the Democrats, and kind of updating it for a different political time.
Yeah, one of the things I would add to that and argue is that it wasn't just about hope and aspiration and all that stuff from the Obamas. You know, who knows better than Barack and Michelle Obama what kind of dog whistles or racist or misogynistic attacks might be coming Kamala Harris's way. And I think that in addition to sort of telling people to feel good in this moment and to recreate this moment from 2008 or whatever, there's also sort of this warning that things can and may get very ugly.
Oh, yeah,
and
they were like marching orders, too.
Yeah, they may get very dark, and that people need to work hard in the next 75, 76 days as all of this stuff comes at them. I think that was just a very distinct moment from both Michelle and Barack Obama.
So finally, let's just look ahead, and I want to know, you know, now that the political conventions for both parties are wrapped up, what comes next? In particular for the Harris campaign, which is only really a month old.
Yeah, so logistically, there are things that are going to happen. Harris has said she's going to sit down for a media interview. She's gotten a lot of criticism for not talking in front of somebody that's giving her an unscripted moment or taking questions she doesn't know the answer to. So that's going to happen at some point. She's going to do a lot more campaigning. But more sort of 30,000 feet, I think that something that her supporters are looking at is whether or not this sort of feel-good sugar high moment begins to erode. You know, is she going to make a mistake or a gaffe or a stumble? Trump is going to keep lobbing attacks her way. Is one of them going to stick? Is one of these names that he's calling her, going to stick?
Yeah, there's no good, catchphase for her, right? Not yet.
So far, but, that doesn't mean he's going to stop, right? It can't be all good all the time. And I think a lot of her advisors are for the Democrats. And so a lot of her advisors are worried about, what happens next or what will that stumbling block be and how will she handle it?
Aaron, what are you expecting out of this?
Yeah, it's usually after a convention, you get a little bit more of a sugar high. So, if the Harris campaign has been rising so far, you would expect maybe they'll rise a little bit more. We're in uncharted territory, though. This is not a situation that we've been in. Maybe the bump that she got was something that came after she got in the race, and now we get a little bit more kind of a skeptical eye trained on her by the American people after this convention. The debates are going to be huge in that way because it is going to be more impromptu. It is going to be jousting with the other side, less scripted. So, there are lots and lots of tests ahead. What we've gotten to this point so far has been largely scripted, and the Republicans have been caught off guard. They don't know what to do about this right now, but 2.5 more months is a lot of time for them to figure out what they're going to do, even if they haven't done it yet.
Well, there's obviously so much more to talk about, but we will have to leave it there. That is it for today's episode. Thank you, Cleve, for joining us.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
And thank you, Aaron. See you next week.
Thanks a lot, Hey. And don't forget to subscribe to the Campaign Moment newsletter.
And you can find a link to the Campaign Moment newsletter in our show notes and at postreports.com. Cleve Wootson is a White House reporter for The Post, and Aaron Blake is a senior political reporter.
If you're tuning in via Post Reports, we will keep bringing you these conversations most Fridays through the election. But you'll also hear more from me if you also follow the Campaign Moment show feed. It's been an unprecedented campaign season so far, and there's a lot more to come. So be sure to look that up wherever you're listening.
Today's episode was produced by Laura Benshoff and Ariel Plotnick. It was mixed by Sam Bair. It was edited by Lucy Perkins and Mary Jo Murphy. Our team also includes Maggie Penman, Rena Flores, Monica Campbell, Ted Muldoon, Alana Gordon, Bishop Sand, Rennie Stranovsky, Sabby Robinson, Emma Talkoff, Sean Carter, Peter Bresnan, Ali Bianco, Allison Michaels, Renita Jablonski, and Martine Powers. I'm Elahe Izadi. Have a great weekend.
And I'm Aaron Blake. See you next week.